when we talk about fear, we talk about it as this monolith and not that we have these different flavors of fear. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of rejection, the fear of missing out, the fear of endings, the fear of losing your freedom, the fear of money. Think of fear in a chronological way and how we as humans experience fear and how fear kind of layers as we get older.
Have you ever been in a state of panic? Have you ever thought about your finances or maybe have a money story where you've thought, okay, can there ever be a healthy state of panic where I can crush my dreams at work, at home, with my kids, slay with the life that I want to build? My guest today just wrote a book called The Healthy State of Panic: How to Follow Your Fears to Build Wealth, Crush Your Career, and Win at Life. She is none other than the So Many expert, the queen that has been all over the scene as a personal finance expert. Her name is Farnoosh Torabi, and I'm so freaking thrilled for you to meet her.
So this is the advice I wish I'd given my younger self, which is that money's important and you should always know your worth and ask for it. I used to think that your measure of success was, well, did you make more money than last year? It's really should be like, are you happier? You have to make a decision. At some point, your plate's going to get fuller. It's not about compromise, but it's about being very clear about what fuels you.
We dive into this juicy book, and it's part memoir, and she is not only witty and funny, but she will make you rethink about your relationship to anxiety, to panic, to crushing at all of your goals. She lays down the 9 most common fears that we all have in this book and that sometimes take hold in our personal life and in our financial decisions, and how fears of rejection, loneliness, missing out on adulthood, and being exposed, uncertainty, money, failure, how it can all be reframed.
Our instinct when fear arrives is to cower, is to shut down, is to freeze, fly, fight. But I want to say, let's figure it out. That's something else we can do when fear arrives. It wants us to look inward for the solutions. Fear is so personal, right? And it shows up for a reason. There's a story there. And I just think that we don't give it enough of a chance in life to be able to help us.
Starting out as a money expert, and obviously you have this incredible podcast, which I was on as well, and we'll link that in the show notes. And now this book. And so tell us about it.
So A Healthy State of Panic, the elevator pitch is that it is a book that will give you the permission you didn't know you needed to honor your fears and to trust fear as a viable emotion. You know, we experience fear daily, and I wanted to focus on the fears that we experience at life's crossroads, big crossroads where the stakes are high, like we're about to make a financial decision, we're about to enter a new relationship or exit a relationship, start a business, deciding whether to have a kid, not have a kid, all of these really important life moments where inevitably you will feel fear to some degree, and how to listen to that fear to understand what it may be trying to tell you, what gap it wants you to fill, where it wants you to go explore and learn. And personally, this book, you know, it's very personal to me. I grew up a terrified little girl, still a terrified adult woman. And it's funny looking back. The reason I was scared growing up was because my parents deliberately raised me to be afraid. Iranian immigrants living in a very, challenging city. Worcester, Massachusetts at the time was rough and tough, at least according to the 5 o'clock news, which my mother watched religiously.
Welcome to immigrant parenting, right?
Yeah, like it fueled a lot of anxiety in our household. And again, too, as immigrants, there is this distrust of the culture, of the American culture. On the one hand, it's ironic. Like they came here for the American dream. I put that in air quotes, but also skepticism. I mean, they came from Iran, where they're, the backdrop of a collapsing regime, a totalitarian situation. And so they know life can be fragile. They know that when you're afraid, there's a reason, a good reason usually. And that was infused in me. And so I was always that constantly on edge kid. And as my mother says, everything worked out. So it did, like I've done a few things. I feel like I'm making strides and I'm living my life in a self-aligned way, not every day, but many of them. And I think that when it came to deciding on what to write next, this is my fourth book, and all my previous books have been about money to some extent. I decided that I wanted to write about money in the context of life, our feelings, our heritages, the way we were raised, and to really bring myself into the fold more than I've ever. And to show that the many dimensions of how to talk about money, and fear is, I always say, the underpinning emotion when we're talking about money. Money's emotional, but fear tends to be the overarching feeling, emotion. And so I say I've been working in the money space professionally for 20 years, but also like in the fear space professionally for 20 years. So taking my personal sort of relationship with fear and the fear as I know it in the context of money and career and life's crossroads. This is where the book kind of, arrived for me. I wanted to explore that, all those things. And I wanted to have fun with this book. My last three books were really hard, and this one was the hardest to write, but I wanted to, surprise the reader a little bit. I feel like I'm in my 40s now. I want to do things that push envelopes and push boundaries and even put into question, my own potential. I hope everybody sees that when they're aging, this is the opportunity, to kind of like do things without permission. And I have to say, publishers were like kind of confused. Like, how are you going to convince people to read this book? And you're the finance expert. You want to write about fear and kind of a memoir. I was like, just wait.
Well, I think you've blown it out of the water, because I'm just not only impressed, I'm like, it's funny, it's so relatable, and I feel like our audience, Brave Table fam, I think you're just gonna love it, because it's literally our story. I mean, it's the full, if you were a kid of immigrant parents, yes, fear was definitely, the thing that we were raised with as well. And I love, so you got to tell everybody about, Tarsu, because we're also learning Farsi as we're kind of diving into this book. So start out with Tarsu. So
Tarsu in Farsi, Tars is the base word for fear, and Tarsu is sort of like a playful twist on the word. You call someone Tarsu when they're showing a lot of fear and you're mocking them essentially. And we reserve this word a lot of times for kids. Like in America, in English, we would say scaredy cat. So I was called Tarsu my entire young life up until even like 2 days ago, when I'm still that little girl inside in some ways. And I opened the book with a story of when I was 4 years old, and my mom had dropped me off at her best friend's house for my mom had to go, and she was actually learning English at the local university, and had dropped me off at her best friend's house, who had a daughter who was around my age. So the idea was like, play while I go do this. And her best friend decided to leave us alone in the house. I'm 4, her daughter's 6. It's the 80s. I think we were allowed to do this back then, although I can't imagine how or why. But even my little 4-year-old brain knew like that is not safe. And her daughter, it was business as usual in their house. I think that it was common for the mom to like go run a quick errand for 15 minutes and come back, as long as the TV was on and the doors were locked and the knives were away, like everybody was safe. And I'm like, absolutely not. And I start throwing a tantrum and screaming and begging her to take me with her. She wanted to go to the store, and a brawl ensues. And I'm like, now I'm in the parking lot, and now she's in the Oldsmobile. She's turning on the car. I'm outside of the car, and I decide I have only one thing left to do, which is to throw my body up against the car. Because would she actually kill me in the pursuit of going to a store? That's how I thought in the moment. And I threw myself up against the rearview mirror, screaming, hollering. I was hoping somebody would come save me. But that, of course, is when I learned that you have only yourself to save in this world. And she did not make it to the store, needless to say. And that story has gone down in our family. It's retold many times, oh, you were so tarsu. And my whole thing is like, yeah, I was. And I'm so happy that I was. And I don't regret it. And I think that who we become as adults, it's not inconsequential to how we were raised, the experiences we've had, the people we are. I, to this day, keep a picture of myself. I think I was 4 or 5, somewhere on my desk, as a reminder of why it's important to keep pushing through, and who you are is special, and to give a nod to that younger self. I mean, do it for her. If you're ever at a crossroads, you're doubting yourself, you're feeling insecure, you're having even just a bad day, like look at that little girl or little boy. And I think it changes the equation.
Oh, totally. Totally. And I feel like many moments when we have the physical book, and we also, and I got a copy for all of our team members as well, which I told you about. And even listening to you talk about these stories, I was like, oh my gosh, she's a natural. And that's why I asked him, like, did you train and stand up? Because it's hysterical listening to you. And I think it's something that we can all really resonate with for a lot of us. And even in the introduction, you say, you've arrived here because there's a part, or all of you, that is intimately aware of fear. Perhaps you grew up constantly on edge because, like me, it was a script that you were taught to follow at home. Hi, like a lot of us. Or you've simply experienced a number of life's quakes, and now anticipating the worst is your norm. And that totally hit me. Yeah. Given, a lot of the things that I think many of us have grown up with, adversities, challenges, setbacks. And so fear is kind of like that North Star. And how did you think to lay out the book? Because it is extremely organized. For a memoir, it's extremely organized. And I think it's so easy to, okay, if I'm dealing with FOMO, I'm going to go in this chapter. Or if I'm dealing with, my own particular freedoms, I'm going to go in this chapter. How did you think of the structure? Because I think that's, as even a writer, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
I'm really proud of the structure, if I can just say, because it wasn't easy, and I definitely struggled with it. And my initial thought was, and I'd never written memoir. I've never actually, Neeta, written so creatively, where there's so much story. You want to weave in a lot of, science and data and interviews, but also really, like I say, come for the advice, stay for the stories. And initially my thought was, I'm just going to write chronologically from my youth to present day. And that got really hard because while that may seem easy, it felt like there was no sense beyond just like the years adding up. There was nothing else that was adding up. It just felt it was falling flat. And it was actually pretty hard to create transitions. So it was actually my editor, who has worked on a lot of novels and worked with far more talented creative writers, and she herself a creative writer, said, I think that maybe if we took a step back and, we're talking about fear, and what if we decided on the 9 to 10 different fears that are universal, but that you yourself personally have a lot of experience with, that could be the chapters. So, and that's, I think, groundbreaking in and of itself a little bit, because when we talk about fear, we talk about it as this monolith, and not that we have these different flavors of fear: the fear of uncertainty, the fear of rejection, the fear of missing out, the fear of endings, the fear of losing your freedom, the fear of money. And so I identified these different fears, and it ended up being about 9 of them. And that became the sort of the chapters. Now, in terms of where to put these chapters, where to put these different fears in the book, I decided to think of fear in a chronological way, and how we as humans experience fear, and how fear kind of layers as we get older. And, initially, I think I start with the fear of rejection, because that is sort of like the first fear that we all experience as young people going to school for the first time. That is fertile ground for fearing rejection. And we experience rejection pretty early. And then later it's loneliness. And then later it's missing out when you go to, your teen years in college, and then, still even. And then later in the book, we address things like failure, uncertainty, money, which I feel are very much more when you're in your professional life and trying to build a career and trying to kind of be an adult. And then as we age, the fear of endings, the fear of losing your freedom is the last chapter, because what's more high stakes than that? I kind of wanted it to end with a chapter that it felt like I couldn't start with that. It felt like a little too heavy, but also in some ways, this was the chapter where I could write a lot about my family and the legacy that they have placed in me, have handed to me, this legacy of fear, and how when you're fearing your sense of freedom being lost, that's an important fear. And it's a fear that is very much in my bloodstream. It's in my DNA. Again, as a daughter of Iranian immigrants, this was the fear that got me here.
Yeah.
Literally, it's what led our family to leave the dangers in their homeland. And so,
and never to return.
I think about my kids, and they're 6 and 9, and they're half Iranian. And will they ever go to Iran? Will it ever be safe for them to go to Iran? I could take them, I guess, technically, but I fear going there, given that I have the career that I have here in media, a public facing person, a person who has talked about Iran in some ways, sometimes not in the best light, sometimes in a great light. Like, I think it would be dangerous. And I talk about that too. When I was in my 20s, I wanted to go to Iran after graduating from journalism school and become a international correspondent, just put my degree to work. And I had a lot of things lined up. And it was my father, who was born in Iran, who said to me, please do not go. Please do not go, because they will kill you. They will kill you. You are a target. You have an X on your back. Like, you are like a triple threat. You're in the media.
And
you're
at
a woman.
This point, they were already targeting journalists, right?
Yeah, this was right after 9/11, and we had started a war with Iraq, a neighboring country. So that's why I wanted to go amidst all that tumult. And I wanted to really just write everyday stories about how people live in this neighboring country and kind of like what this war means for them and their daily life. And I was going to stay with relatives. I had my credentials. Even then, my dad said, no, please, it's not safe. And they had already proven to us that it wasn't safe. They had captured journalists and imprisoned them, and some didn't make it. So the threat was real, and you'll have to read the book to see how things unfolded. But it was a story that I had to say for the end, because it was just and I will say that when you experience fear, it's not just like one kind of fear in that moment. In that moment, I feared so many things. I feared my life, but I also feared failure. I feared rejection. I feared missing out. All my classmates who were men going to the war zones and the conflict zones and probably making names for themselves much faster than I ended up staying in New York, writing about mutual funds for Money Magazine. But it all worked out, as my mother said.
Your mother would be very happy. I mean, is she happy today?
Is she happy? Oh yeah, she's thrilled. She's living her best life. It's taken a while. She wasn't always. She was always. We could never understand why in every single photo in the 80s, my mother was frowning. It was a hard life.
I mean, I don't know if you saw this. I'll have to send it to you, but there is this meme, and shout out Brave Table fam if you can send it to me. But there's this meme where it's like, you're a son or daughter of immigrant parents when the albums that they took pictures in the 80s, and then they did kind of like a replica of like, standing in front of the, a truck, just like hands down, frowning, holding a basket of like fruits, but just like looking in an odd way.
My gosh.
Or just like
I'm going to make my own meme of that, because I have so many of those photos, like us just standing in front of I remember the water fountain in the mall at Worcester Center Mall in the 80s, where everybody just would go. The mall in the 80s was like
big deal.
The place. It's where you went. And we wouldn't buy anything. We would just go and walk and like browse the stores. And it would just be like a bunch of unhappy Iranians with this gorgeous waterfall in the backdrop, all these like beautiful lights, the stores, the retail. And I was upset probably too, because I wasn't allowed to buy anything. I was like, why are you bringing me here? You're just teasing me. But
I just want to, I want to get into, there's so many different avenues, but one that really sticks out, because I'm so glad you ended the book with freedom as, freedom of speech. And so much of, I think the word freedom is so big kind of in today's light, just in every aspect, whether you're living here, whether you're global. And I feel like for a lot of our audience who is global, I know that is a word that is definitely ringing true. So I'm so glad that you shared as a journalist, as somebody who kind of the intersection and the cross section of so many things, the culmination, you kept it at the last chapter. But I want to double click on the rejection, and the chapter in which you talk a little bit about rejection trauma, and specifically the story of when your first book came out, So Money. That was your first one. And you got the invitation to come on the Today Show.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, what an opportunity. Also terrified.
Because you were in your 20s.
I'm in my 20s. It's my first time going to be on national television live. And, I'm a journalist, so I kind of know how to, again, like structure I'm not like completely, naive to the situation, but I'd never been on the other side of the interview. I was always the one asking the questions. And now suddenly I'm the one in front of the camera on this great stage. And so I was really scared the night before. And I was focusing on a lot of the wrong things, as what tends to happen when we fear rejection and failure. We tend to, the instinct is to follow other people's metrics for success and try to apply them to ourselves and practice them ourselves when it's not authentic. And that's exactly what I did. And it ended up blowing up on air. I mean, maybe it didn't seem like that to the viewer, but it was a few seconds of misspeaking that really, oh gosh, it was gutting. But essentially, I spent the night before trying to put on an act. Like, I was like, okay, I have to go out there, and I was really focused on what I was going to wear. How should I cross my legs? The speed of my speaking, my cadence, and not thinking about how to just listen to the questions and answer them as I had been answering them in real life with friends and family and everybody in an authentic way, and really making those connections. But somehow now I'm on TV and the stakes are higher and I have to completely show up differently.
Yeah.
That was my calculus. And what ended up happening was I got on the show, and the first minute or two, I was just speed talking and not really listening to the questions. And I ended up telling Meredith that more or less, like, she's an old person, and you'll have to read the book. I'm just going to say, but it was more or less like, and she's such a pro. She's so graceful. I think she also knew she saw the terror in my eyes, and was very, she laughed. But in that moment, I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. And that's kind of a blessing sometimes. Like, I don't recommend it on live television, but for me,
and to be fair, there's only 4 minutes in a segment. So,
yeah, but it's like, when you're not doing well, and it's like 4 minutes is like 400 minutes, it's like the time cannot go any faster. And so when I personally had felt that I had hit a low during the very early seconds of that interview, I had nothing else. I was like, nothing that I thought was going to work for me is working. All these tools that I brought with me to the show to try to act a certain way, to try to speak a certain way, to try to look a certain way, they're all failing me. I'm failing at that. So I have to just, guess what? Be myself. That's got to be good enough, because that's all I got. And it was a split moment decision to kind of just like change gears and just kind of let loose and decide that I have to be comfortable now, and I have to listen. I have to go slowly, and maybe I won't have a perfect answer, but I won't say the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. And I ended the interview. I remember Meredith was being rushed off to like the upstairs area for another live shot. And she thanked me and she said, great job, and left. And I was like, oh, what a liar Meredith is. And then I see the producer coming over and I'm like, oh my God, she's going to kill me. And she said, okay, so I want you to know, and this is when I thought she was going to say, your car is outside. Please never come back. She said, I want you to know that our executive producer, and this is also when I thought they would say, wants to kill you. But she said, I want you to know that our executive producer would like to have you back.
Wow.
And I was like, did he watch what just happened? Did he step out to go get a muffin and then came back and just saw the last minute? And she said, when you said that thing and you recovered, that was a real authentic human moment. And I think was so relatable. And everybody started loving you more in that moment because you failed and there was no hiding from it. There was no escaping it. You just did. It happened. But you landed on your feet and you were committed to landing on your feet. And it was really watchable. I think I might have increased ratings in that moment. That's why live TV is so special.
But here's the thing though. Back then we would probably call it, because, back then we would call it like a failure or, recovering from that, being human. But I feel like now it's just being, so honest. Yeah. And I feel like you talk a lot around that. And that's probably why your show has done so well over the years. It's like unapologetic, no BS, because, do you think that because of that pre-rehearsed stuff that wasn't even you, your body was like, no, it was a
rejection. No, you're right. I think you're right. I think, I think that it was my body's way of going, what is going on? And just deciding for me, like, we have to stop and rewrite this script. Going into the interview, I think the reason I was so nervous wasn't just because it was live and it was a really big surreal moment for me, but because I knew that being 28 years old at the time that I was, to get this opportunity, not everybody was going to be cheering me on. I was not naive to that. I had experienced rejection in the sense that there were people who were very competitive in my world and in media, especially in New York. I mean, forget it, it's so cutthroat that your loss, some people do feel like it's a zero-sum game. Your loss is their gain. And so I thought about them ahead of that, and that worried me. And I didn't want to give them any reason to feel as though, I don't want them to think like, well, we knew she wasn't cut out for this, or we knew, or, great. Like there are just some people that like to see others fail because it makes them feel more successful. And I just didn't want to be targeted like that.
Yeah. But I also want to point out that because of the air quotes human moment that you had, the producers loved it. And that's now the Farnoosh that I know, the funny, humorous, quick-witted, no BS on your podcast, on your show, and even now in your books.
Yeah.
That has grown for so many people to love and adore, because you've even shared that people leave you reviews on your podcast saying like, you're so relatable. But that back then, it probably wasn't the norm. And I'm thinking maybe you paved the way.
Yeah, back then, that was not what we thought was what helped your authority. Mm-hmm. And authority was everything. The more authoritative you were, the more likely you would get gigs, the more likely people would trust you, the more likely you would continue being gainfully employed in the expert world, right? When you look at also, and I was playing in a man's world where I remember the early days of like wanting to reject the suits. I was like, I just don't want to wear a suit. Can I not be in a photograph with my arms crossed?
Did you reject the suit?
I did. I didn't want to wear a suit. I remember, I used to report from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in the early days of my reporting life. And the New York Stock Exchange at the time, I think they have since become more lax on their wardrobe policy. But this was back in like the mid 2000s. And I remember trying to swipe in to get inside the trading floor. And I was stopped by the security guard. And he was like, "Where's your jacket?" And I was like, "I don't think I need a jacket because I'm wearing a skirt, like a skirt. So they had a policy. It was really weird. It was like, if you're wearing a dress, you didn't need a jacket. But if you're wearing pants or a skirt, you needed a jacket.
What?
And I was like, I forgot. I got the wires crossed, and I was like, but I'm wearing a skirt. And he's like, yeah, you need a jacket. If you're wearing a dress, you don't need a jacket. And I was like, okay, but I have a live shot in like 15 minutes. Can you just let me do this? And then I'll go figure the wardrobe out. He was like, nope.
Oh, wow.
And so I called someone upstairs who I knew, who was a man. And I said, can I come and grab your coat? And he said, okay. So I did a live shot wearing an extra large man's jacket, just because that was the rule back then. And I didn't include that story in the book, but thank you for giving me the space to share it here, because it's crazy. It needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Wow.
They used to check the length of your nails before you could go into the stock exchange. You couldn't have long nails.
No. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and this was still, I'm 20, I'm in my 20s. This was not like, it was not even the 1900s anymore. It was the 2000s, and we were still playing by this old rule book.
This
It's
patriarchal game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so antiquated. Well, and I kind of even want to go into, so you had this interview, it changed the trajectory. Even though you thought this was going to kill your career, it actually had the opposite effect.
Mm-hmm.
So then what did it lead you to do next?
Well, for a while, it helped me get so many more opportunities, mainly more media. When you're on the Today Show and you've been vetted, you get so many other people calling you to come on their shows or write for them. And so for what it really did was it allowed me to build more of that expert platform that I didn't even know at the time I was building. But to be able to go on these big media platforms and talk and share and give advice, I mean, you're building a narrative there, right? Essentially, of like you being an expert, a go-to person in your field. And that helped me to land speaking opportunities, my next book deal, more television. And it really came to be helpful when I got laid off a year later. So all this while I'd been working full-time at a news organization, simultaneously publishing this book, and then also doing all this sort of, extra media work as a result of the book. And then I get laid off, and I'm scared because I didn't believe that I could just be me. Mm-hmm. I thought I had to be Farnoosh attached to a media organization who gave me some credentials, who gave me a title, and then I felt safe, and then I felt confident. And now I was at this crossroads. It was the recession. It was 2008, 2009, and I mean, did I even have the choice to go back to find another full-time job in media? Those jobs were very scarce at the time. And so it just seemed like I should just go do this entrepreneurship thing and just be an expert on my own. And it was a hard realization, but I did it, and I never looked back. That was now, 16 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And around the time that you wrote So Money.
Yes, it was subsequent to writing the first book. I always say, not everybody has a book in them, but everybody needs to have some kind of intellectual property, something creative that is their own, that nobody can lay them off from, that might one day be their parachute if and when they lose or decide not to work in a 9-to-5 anymore, that can be something that you can hang your hat on and eventually learn how to turn into a business. And that's what I did. I had to learn very quickly how to take and leverage and harness all this media attention and the book and turn it into a business. And every year the business looks a little bit different, but at the core, it's Farnoosh leading with her advice, personality driven, and trying to help people accomplish wealth and building wealth. And that can look different. Like for the past 9 years, it's been mostly a podcast. Now there's another book in the fold. This year I'm trying to ramp up the speaking again. And so it's my challenge is trying to figure out where to put the attention of the business, but but it's been, as we were talking about before we went live, it's been a sustainable route, and it's always looked different, as I said, but it's continued, and I have to find trust in that, and because there are days when I'm like, man, if I'd only gotten on TikTok in 2020 when the world shut down and started dancing, could be a different equation for me right now. But I was instead crying in the shower, trying to figure out Zoom school. And
like a lot of us.
Like a lot of us.
Like
so
a lot of us.
I don't know if I could go back in time. Could I have even done things differently?
I cry about TikTok sometimes.
I have deleted it from my app. I deleted the app from my phone this year. You can still find me. Yeah, I was just not interested in the distraction anymore.
And this goes into your chapter a little bit about FOMO. And I feel like some of our listeners, they're braving the unknown, and they're braving uncertainty, and they're braving quitting that 9 to 5 and starting that new pursuit and that new venture. And I feel like this book really goes into all of the fears, which is so apropos as we are, I don't know if you're into astrology, but this year is the number 8, and it's success and abundance and,
wow.
So there you go. But the reason why I bring that up is there's this FOMO. And even though this year is supposed to be abundant and like, let's get into everything because everything is supposed to be successful. It's the year of 8. And that's what the number kind of the definition of the number. And so when we get into your chapter around FOMO, and as a new creator, as somebody that wants to try everything, we think that we need to be on YouTube or do the next thing or see the next shiny object. How have you been able to manage your time? And what do you say around this FOMO that we all have? And I feel like you've kind of laid it out so beautifully in the book.
For me, I think FOMO, it's such a teacher. It doesn't always present as someone that wants to help you or fear, like an emotion. It's not like a helpful fear. It's like there's so much adrenaline and you feel like you have to make an impulse move. And it's usually leaves you feeling less than or missing out. And I find that when FOMO arrives, I think it's important to listen to the sound in your body, the voice that's saying like, oh, that's interesting. But to not think that you have to go and mimic what you're witnessing to experience joy or fulfillment or success or whatever you're after, but that maybe it is that you need to figure out what you need to do next to get there. Like you're seeing someone do something that's interesting, that's sparking some curiosity in you, and you think that that's what you have to do because they're modeling success. Like that's the formula, we think. But is it really what you should do? And when you have FOMO, I think it's important to sit with that feeling and try to figure out, how am I going to accomplish the end result there that person's experiencing, whether that's this person looks like they're freeing up time in their life through this revenue stream, or they're able to make an impact, or they're able to work from home. And I want those things. But is it that you have to start an online course? No. The way that they have? No. Maybe it's that you have to just go find your own formula for your own ingredients for that end result. So just to give an example, because people might be listening being like, okay, but what's the example? So my example is that online course story where it was around 2016. And I've been working as a solopreneur. Now this is my 8th year. Things are going well, but I'm finding that many others in my domain in personal finance education are going on the internet and teaching and providing courses and seemingly making a killing and touting it as like, oh, this incredible way to make passive income. You make this course, you teach it once, it just sells in perpetuity. And I thought, well, I have a lot to teach and I'm good at teaching and I need to do a course because I'm leaving money on the table and I can't leave money on the table. So then I go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out how to do a course. I bought the courses on courses. I just was mesmerized by and blinded in a way by like all the positives. And then I got into it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like more of a sales approach than anything. This isn't even about teaching. This is about marketing and sales and data tracking and having a team and all things that I don't like to do. I didn't get into this world to focus on that. I wanted to get into my world to teach and to make an impact and to be of service and connect with people. So I didn't get too far down the hole, but I remember having lunch with a friend who had a course and was, again, one of my inspiring friends. And he's like, don't do a course. It's so much work. And I'm like in a corner. I can't get out of it because I've sort of built it and now I have to keep building it. And yes, I made 7 figures, but a lot of that went to expenses and Facebook ads and my team. And so when I sat with that FOMO, I thought, well, something in me is restless and I want to figure out how to address it. Like, what is it? What is it that I'm craving in my career that this course world seems to exhibit? But obviously I can't do a course because it's not who I am. And it was that I wanted more control of my revenue streams. I wanted to be able to go more direct to consumer. I wanted to teach. I wanted to make an impact. Are there ways to do that don't necessarily require building a course? Yes. For me, I figured the solution would be let's do a workshop. Let's do a live in-person workshop where I don't have to worry about scaling. I don't have to worry about getting 1,000 people to buy this. I just need 10. And I can make it a higher price point because I know people are willing to pay more than a course for an in-person live experience where they're going to get access and attention and relationships. So I started to do that. I started to teach. At the time, a lot of people were coming up to me asking about how did I build my brand? How did I build my business? So I started teaching that in a 2-day workshop, mostly through the journey of a book. So I brought in prospective authors and entrepreneurs who wanted to do that. And they paid me handsomely for 2 days. And it was so much fun. I was a producer in television once upon a time. So this was for me like another production and thinking about all the moving parts, which I like. I love executive functioning. And it was very me. And honestly, probably had the same profit margin as a course, but just didn't involve all the things that I don't like to do that are behind the scenes in a course.
Well, and I'm so glad you bring that up because I feel like there's so much of that shine, especially now with, just being on the online world. And I feel like you and I are kind of like on the older side of being millennials, that, I think that it isn't for everyone. And I think that sometimes the shine and the FOMO really gets in the way. And then if we're not managing our expectations or even kind of this idea that you kind of talk about really trusting and knowing what's right for you. Right. I'm so glad that you were able to figure out, and for anybody listening, to figure out if that is really you. Because I think there was one of your posts where you on Instagram where you were kind of saying, yeah, I don't like having a team. I like being a solopreneur. And contrary to popular opinion,
even if it means leaving money on the table, I'll never be the entrepreneur that's like, I'm an 8-figure entrepreneur. Okay. That's okay. That doesn't feed my ego. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to make a good living and go back to living my life also. I mean, I wish this is the advice I wish I'd given my younger self, which is that money's important and you should always know your worth and ask for it, but you have to make a decision. At some point, your plate's going to get fuller. You're going to have a family, you're going to have kids, you're going to have interests outside of work. And it's not about compromise, but it's about being very clear about what fuels you. Where do you want to spend most of your time? Do you want to spend all your time working? Some people, the answer is yes. But for me, the answer is no. And as a result, it's not for me then about just trying to one up my profitability every year. I used to think that your measure of success was, well, did you make more money than last year? And it's not, I think like it's really should be like, are you happier? Do you have maybe more time? How's your time bank doing? I remember talking to a woman who is she's a celebrity and she's on camera, and she, when I were discussing she's she has a contract that she renews every so often with her network. And she said, in my 50s, in my prime, I've earned it. And now I've really seen what I really want in life. In the beginning, it was like, take all the jobs. Now she says, when I negotiate, I don't ask for more money. I ask for more time back. So I'm going to make the same money as last year, but I'm going to work maybe only 75% as much or
Yeah.
50% as much.
Well, and
So,
time is that
yeah.
precious resource that we have. And I feel like before we wrap up, there's like one other topic that I want to get into, which I feel like it really struck a chord. And I know that for a lot of the moms, and you're a mama of two as well as I, this idea of, this fear of loneliness. And as we're talking about our new endeavors and even the working mamas who are starting their solo ventures and maybe wanting to have more time back with their families, the big thing that we don't necessarily talk about is the loneliness. And I know that in your book you have this, it's a silent epidemic, but that a recent Harvard study found that 1 in 3 Americans, including 61% of young adults and over half of mothers with little kids, express serious loneliness. So
Yeah.
can we dive into that?
Well, if you're experiencing loneliness or you're fearing it, you should. It's not a good place to be in. I think, though, there's a lot of strength that can be developed as you sit with your loneliness. The key is to use that lonely time constructively. And even if it means going out solo, but walking around. And I remember being very, very, very lonely when I was in college and getting an internship in New York City for the first time. And I mean, I should not have been just sitting in my dorm at NYU facing a brick wall every night eating a Subway sandwich, but I was, because one, I had no money, but two, I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was like not in tune with myself. And so I feared going out there and like getting lost and so being inside where things were recognizable and comfortable. And even though, not great, I felt safer. But I think once I decided to just sort of like go out there and like, I would get off the subway a few stops before I was supposed to, purposely, so that I could get lost, but within a safe, like with boundaries, like I was like, I kind of know where I am, but I think it's important for me to like do this walk and have a little bit of spontaneity in my life and do it solo and to really observe things like people and sounds and nature. And New York is full of that. I mean, it's like what a missed opportunity. And I had fortunately the foresight to force myself to do that. But it was like that little thing that brought me a little bit out of my shell and also made me more comfortable with being by myself. Like when you're alone, it's really, really hard. But if you can just sort of know that it's important to still do something in your loneliness. My mother would dance alone in the house on early Sunday mornings in those
Yes.
early 1980s days. She was a very lonely new mom, immigrant, young woman, and she really missed and was lonely because she missed her life back home. She missed her parents. She missed her friends. She missed her bedroom in her mom's house and all of the routines, and now like thrusted into this life. And so her way of working through her loneliness solo was to dance to Persian music on a Sunday morning for just a half an hour before anybody she thought was awake. Of course, I was still awake. I was awake. I was watching her from the top of the stairs.
Oh, I love
And
that.
at the time, I was like, okay, that's interesting that she's doing that. But now, as an adult woman who has her own kids, who's able to reflect on her mom with just all this now lived life and experience and context, I see that for her was how she would find the beauty in her fear of loneliness, that her fear of loneliness was saying, don't stay stuck, get moving, do something. In that process, you're going to get reconnected to a part of yourself that you have lost. And in that moment, in that process, you're going to get comfortable being alone. And that's a fact of life. We're all going to be alone. We're all going to be lonely at times. But if we can have a bag of tools, or something to do, we know, okay, this is what I'm going to do in that moment when I'm alone. When I was a kid, I would put on the television. I was a latchkey kid. I was very
Yeah.
lonely. I mean,
Yep.
just to put it simply, I mean, that's
Yeah.
a very like direct, straightforward way of like, you're alone and yeah, noise, other people's voices, other people's lives coming, I would like, that helped me so much.
And I think also
Yeah.
because, a lot of us come from these collective communities where Asian, Iranian backgrounds kind of like come as a troop. And I know you speak about, having your Memuni parties growing up where, I mean, it's there's community, but I think there's also the beauty as you're sharing. I'm just imagining you walking around getting lost in New York City, but I feel like people have created there's this thing that I came across, like the 12-hour walks somebody started during
Wow.
COVID, where he's like a really big athlete who's done all of these like crazy adventures all throughout the world and Antarctica and other places, and has these world records. But he started this group of basically just 12-hour walks where you don't have your phone, you don't have headphones, you're just walking. So you're getting lost purposefully, but you're also finding yourself and kind
Mm-hmm.
of, just that honoring the divinity within yourself, whether it's through prayer, meditation, insights, perspectives, etc. And I think that it gives, kind of like what you're saying in the book, a different perspective of meeting loneliness as a friend and just
Yeah.
kind of being okay sitting with it and honoring it and welcoming it and seeing what comes
Yeah.
up.
I think the challenge for so many of us is being alone with ourselves, with our thoughts.
Yeah.
And we fear not so much the loneliness, but where our minds could go.
Mm.
And we tend to like catastrophize. We tend to go to the dark places first. It's human nature. So in those moments, I think if you know yourself, you need to course correct. And it's like you have a choice in this moment of this with this fear. The fear is telling you have choices. You can sit here and continue to be afraid, or you can take an action step that would be healthy. And maybe for some people it is meditating. That's not simple for me, but I think for me it's easier to like move my body, go do something. Back to being in on the college campus. I went to Penn State, which is a
Mm-hmm.
huge football school. Did you know that?
No.
And I was not excited about football, and still am not, but so weekends were huge football weekends. I would be like twiddling my thumbs. None of my friends were around. And at first it was very sad, but also I like kind of looked at it differently. I was like, well, this is the first time all week where I can like walk around campus and not bump into anybody. I can sit wherever I want in the coffee shop. I can sprawl out on the lawn. I have basically this whole campus to myself. And to look at it that way, it felt very freeing and no longer Farnoosh being alone and lonely, but Farnoosh like going on an adventure and being able to have some freedom that I didn't have before. So I think that that's also an opportunity for us in those lonely moments. And again, I wanted to write the book because these things aren't instinctive to us
Right.
necessarily. Our instinct when fear arrives is to cower, is to shut down, is to freeze, fly, fight. But I want to say, let's figure it out. That's something else we can do when fear arrives. It wants us to look inward for the solutions. Fear is so personal, right? And it shows up for a reason. There's a story there. And I just think that we don't give it enough of a chance in life to be able to help us.
Well, and I think you do an incredible job of this. So where can we get your book, The Healthy
Thank
State
you.
of Panic?
It's available everywhere. I'd like to say it's also like in your local airport, and which I considered a big win. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the Dallas airport.
That's huge.
A healthystateofpanic.com is the homepage for the book. And thank you so much. I'm so honored to be on the Brave Table.
Oh my
with you.
goodness. Well, and our final question that we ask everyone before we wrap up, what does it mean to be brave?
If I may bring it back to the book, I think it's recognizing that you don't have to be fearless.
Mm.
You can be brave and fearful at the same time. And when you're fearful, the act of bravery comes through saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to be fear curious. I'm going to like explore this fear, and I might bring this fear along with me on this journey. So I do it with more authenticity and do it in a way that feels more me and speaking to my integrity. I mean, that's brave, is like recognizing how you're feeling, addressing it, unpacking it, doing the work of figuring out what the wisdom is and then applying it. That's the work. Fearlessness does not, it's like, the thing is, the way it works is that it doesn't. And so to tell yourself that you're fearless and that's why you're brave, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I think that there was probably a part of you that did unpack the fear. And maybe you're just so darn good at it. It happened quickly. And so it felt like you're being fearless, but no, you did have a relationship with your fear. And that's what I really want us to recognize and appreciate more, so we can be more honest with ourselves.
Yes, more of that. And you do that so well. Everyone needs to get this book, A Healthy State of Panic. Follow your fears to build wealth, crush your career, and win at life. Farnoosh Torabi, this has been so incredible. So great to sit with you at the Brave Table.
Thank you. Appreciate you so much.
Until next time. Okay, loves. Go run, go to Amazon, go wherever you get your books. If you're supporting a local bookstore, go to Audible right now. Download this book, A Healthy State of Panic. I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. Farnoosh is such a master creator and orator at being able to not only blend seamlessly her personal anecdotes and her personal stories and not only make it humorous, but you kind of feel that you're in the room with her, and you're going to love getting finance advice from her. She's hysterical on Instagram. So go follow her at Farnoosh Torabi, as well as you probably want to add her podcast show to your daily dose or your weekly dose. So go ahead and follow So Money. It's So Money wherever you are, especially if you are on YouTube. And if you've been following us for a while, or if you just bumped into this episode, I would so love for you to hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, wherever you are watching or listening to this. And if this will help a friend to chuckle, laugh, giggle, and maybe even gain new perspective in their lives, please send them this episode. And if you haven't already, sent us a 5-star review or shared how this episode or how the Brave Table has impacted your life. We would so love if you can send it to support@globalgrit.co. Once you've actually submitted the review, take a screenshot and send it to support@globalgrit.co, and we will send you a free gift. I'm giving free gifts all over this month because I'm celebrating you all. It's been my birthday month, and I love the month of July, and so we're giving away gifts. And on that note, I want to thank you so much for tuning in week after week. It really honors me that we have grown this community, and we are growing here on the YouTubes and on the interwebs. So thank you so much. It really means a lot. And I will see you next time. Don't forget to be just a little bit more brave.